Everybody's got something to say about poetry, because rhymes speak in meaning shedding lights on our unspeakables. Those were lines from a video that Ms.Chee posted on Moodle. It was a poem delivered by a guy named Adam Gottlieb, and his poem was an example of what is called slam poetry. Slam what? Well, slam poetry is a competition where poets recite their original work, just as we create our own speeches and deliver them to the class. They too write their own poems and deliver them to a stage. Back in the 5th grade, I participated in a declamation contest. The experience felt great, so I thought doing an extensive research on a similar topic, slam poetry, would be interesting. Now, slam poetry and declamation are similar, but there's also a big difference between the two, which I will discuss later. For now, in this presentation, we'll know a lot about what slam poetry is, and we'll have an insight to the slam poet's world. First, I'll talk about the history, then I'll talk about the procedures, and finally I'll say why people have a knack for it. So, the history. To learn the history, we must first be aware of how it was created, and then be aware of the competition's whereabouts. Poetry was a very big deal in the past. Almost everyone was interested in writing poems. However, as time went on, people started to lose interest. Thankfully, in 1984, a guy named Mark Smith came to the rescue. According to an article published on the website Rattle by Susan B.A. Somers Willett, while Smith was sitting around writing his poem in the Get Me High Lounge in Chicago. No, it's not a place where people get high from drugs. Anyway, while he was sitting there, he was able to come up with a competitive style of poetry. He termed it slam poetry. From then on, that style of poetry became popular and is still well liked by many people today. Its events are held everywhere. Not only are they held in the United States, but also in other parts of the world. According to Somers Willett, the Slam Poetry Incorporation generates over 100 competitions internationally. They not only take place in bars, but also in schools, local auditoriums, and bookstores. So now that we know the history, let's move on to the procedures. To fully understand the procedures, we must first learn the rules and then be associated with the judging system. So now the rules. According to an article published in the website Slam Puppy entitled "What is Poetry?" written, Mark Smith explains the rule briefly. Rule number 1 is that the poems that each poet write have to be of their personal creations. Rule number 2 is that any means of support is allowed, so that means no props, no video, no audio, and no costumes. Rule number 3 is that it can't exceed the limit of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. If they do go over that time limit, then points are deducted to their score. Sounds familiar? Now the judging system. Competition is based on a 0 to 10 scale. Before the competition starts, the host handpicks 5 random judges from the audience, and they can base their judgment on however they see fit. However, they're told to not let the audience influence their judgment. From the first round, they pick the highest scorers to move on to the second round, and from the second round, they pick the highest scorers to move on to the third and final round. So basically, that's the judging process. Now, having shared a little history and having elaborated on the procedures, let us now proceed to why people have a knack for them. A lot of people take interest in slam poetry. Many of them join to boost confidence, while others join to express themselves. So one reason they join is to gain confidence. According to a case study of slamming from the Journal of Adolescence and Adult Literacy by Lynn Rod on May 2012, young students feel very welcome in the poetry world, and they get tons of encouragement from their peers, helping build their self-confidence. Also, a lot of them have stage fright, so the fact that slam poetry requires them to speak to a crowd as they take on the microphone more and more, then their self-confidence develops. Another reason they join is to express themselves. Many of the contestants are troubled with personal problems, so this poetry to them is a means of escapism. Just writing is not enough. Being able to utter your frustrations, your interpretations, those are the key things. They don't just slam for points, they slam for the wonderful experience. As Linrod further states, the point is not for points, the point is for poetry. Basically, they write to express and not to impress. Now that we know plenty of information about slam poetry, let us conclude. By learning about slam poetry, I hope that we were all able to enter the magical world of slam poets. First of all, I gave a brief history, then I talked about the procedures, and finally I reasoned why people join. Now let's end with these last lines from the Adam Gottlieb's video.
Once you start your piece, you can die behind that microphone end. Death may be breathless, but poetry's deathless. No breath be our savior eternal. Poets, breathe once with me now. That's one poem we all wrote.
That was beautiful.